Stop. Okay, thank you. So, what went on in that moment? What happened? Nothing happened. Out here, it was quiet, it was still. But what happened in here? I imagine a whole lot happened. There's a whole world going on. You have your reactions. Wasn't what you expected. Maybe it wasn't what you wanted. But if you're a normal person, you have reactions. And then you react to your reactions. And then you're off to the races. You know? All that life just comes filling up the emptiness. Did you notice what happened? Did you pay attention? How did this lead to that? That's one question. It's self-inquiry. Paying attention takes a certain discipline. Second question I have is, who had those reactions? Who noticed that? What kind of being is that, really? And I have a third question, which I hope I remember to ask. If I forget, please remind me. Important question. So I was preparing for this. I began preparing for this at the beginning of December. And I do a lot. I like to do a lot in the morning, waking up. I'm open and I'm fresh. And I thought, well, you know me. Of course, I have to talk about Jesus, right? This Sunday is the Sunday of Epiphany, Epiphany Sunday. 2 days ago was actually the Feast of Epiphany, also known as the Adoration of the Magi. 12 days after the birth of Christ. There's that number 12 again. And it's something that we celebrate once a year. An epiphany is a sudden manifestation of the divine. Or I like to think of it as the truth that underlies all of the things that we think we know. So, of course, I will talk about Jesus, but then, I think the Buddha might have something to say about this. And also, this is UCC, so Reinhold Niebuhr would have something to say. I'd want to include him, and then the Dalai Lama. Wouldn't that be great? It would be an Epiphany Mount Rushmore. Wow, that would be so cool. And then I thought, but then I'd have to do all that work of reconciling the thought of these four people. And I just became buried under all that granite. And I was intimidated, I was lost, I was confused, I was struggling. And I turned away. I'm on the second floor, and I looked out the window. And there's a red roof about 40 yards away. I see all the time. That morning, it was covered in frost. It was so white, pure, still, beautiful. And I came into contact with that. And after a while, I started thinking that, well, that's the first frost that I've seen. Sign of the change of seasons. Seasons come and the seasons go, and nature has these enduring cycles, and it was so comforting. And since I had started thinking, I returned to the thoughts that I was thinking, to the task at hand, and I realized that my thinking had led me to a kind of place of despair of, how am I going to do this? And my heart, some other part of me said, listen, let's not talk about it. Let me just show you. Let me just give you the experience. So that's a kind of an ordinary epiphany. It happens all the time if you have the space and the presence of mind to be open to it. That has so many of the qualities of an epiphany. It's not a real epiphany. To give you an example of that, let me tell you the story of Charlie the ant. Charlie's an ordinary ant, he's like super strong and very devoted, very persistent. He's on task. And one morning he gets up, they're going out, he joins the group, and they're going out looking for food for themselves and for the colony. And like other ordinary ants, he lives in a two-dimensional world, okay? He can see forward and back, left and right. That's the world. He lives in a two-dimensional world. So he's walking along and he notices something different, something he's never experienced before. And he looks ahead and behind and left and right, and he doesn't see anything. It's probably nothing. So he continues on. And in a little while, he notices it again. And he looks around, and, it did happen again. Well, he had that experience. And it haunts. He doesn't have lips, nothing. He can't see anything, but he has this hunch, which is new, and he follows that hunch. He even forgets what job is. He forgets about food, and he forgets about others. And at one time, he said, oh, there's a third dimension. There's an up and a down. And that's what I'm experiencing. This was a game changer. This was an experience that affected everything. Once you get it, once you see it, you can't unsee it. He sees the whole world in a new way. That's something more like an epiphany. And he can't wait to get back to the colony and tell his brothers and his sisters about this amazing new experience, and his nieces and his nephews and his uncles and his, well, I know that was a long way to go to get there. But what's he going to say? How can he tell them? I mean, it makes no sense to them. Their language is a representation or representation of the world that they know. They don't even have the language for that. So this is a problem with epiphany. But this is not the kind of epiphany that the Bible's talking about. This is kind of an epiphany of science. And in fact, this parable kind of works because we're three-dimensional people, or 4 dimensions if you think of time. And in fact, through the efforts of bringing string theory to the experimental results at the quantum level, quantum mechanics, they're talking about a fifth dimension, like they've even sort of proved it in theory, and I believe now they're up to 11. But this is not quite the same thing. An epiphany is not about another dimension like previous dimensions. It's something completely new. And we did in the readings this morning, the sections, just very briefly, of the epiphanies that ordinary people had surrounding the birth of Jesus. And it starts with the Magi. They're not kings, that just comes from the song. And they're not wise men in the sense of conventional wisdom. My daughter's Christmas card to me was a woman on stairs. By the way, there's a picture of Charlie and his colony in your bulletin, going upstairs. But the woman is surrounded by maybe her daughters and their friends, and she's telling them now, 3 wise men. And you open the card and it says, "Be serious." So these were not wise in that way. They were, at the time that the Gospels were written, they are people interested in the occult, in unconventional wisdom, like astrology. It includes astronomy, but it's about you personally, your personality, your character, and your fate. They would be interested in the Enneagram, which is both local in the East, the Sufis knew about it, also in the West, Philo, Kabbalah. And they'd be interested in the healing powers of herbs and plants. A little off base. You know, in the Middle Ages, around the time of the Black Death, the women who were interested in the healing powers of herbs were witches. And they were persecuted. They were murdered, actually, to put it more directly. So these wise men, this is a story of their journey. It's not an historical event. The people that told the stories, the people that heard the stories, did not care about history. They did not care about what happened. They want to know the connection between the seen and the unseen. These are myths, okay? But they have content. And the Magi tell of a path. How do you get to Epiphany? Well, you might see a star, and you might have to leave your locality, your home, but whatever wealth you have, your friends, and take off. If you want to follow that star, you're going to travel across the desert at night. So it needs the qualities of persistence, of faith, of commitment. And I think it needs other people. There were 3. It was a group. Okay? I know if I took off in the desert at night, I'd get pretty squirrely, you know? So to have people that you can say, well, this is what I saw, and this is what I think, and this is what I'm afraid to see, and, you know, to share that. In the East, it'd be called the Sangha, the community. That's what we have here, community of seekers. There's one more thing that's different about them, is that they were not really into seeking. A lot of people who might be on such a caravan they like the scenery, they get around the oasis at night and they talk about it. We like seeking, and they're done, you know? They're happy. That's enough for them, not the Magi. We're going to seek until we find. Okay? We're finders. That's what we're about. We want to actually experience whatever that star is leading us to. The shepherds tell of a different story. The shepherds were also kind of lived out in the darkness at night, and they also didn't have much. There's not a lot of advancement potential in shepherding, you know. And they were kind of the lowest. this was given to this kind of job is given to people like, well, we don't want them doing anything else, you know. They're not going to be inheriting property or managing an estate. Let them just be with their sheep at night. So they don't have much. They're open-hearted. And they don't do anything. And God comes to them. We forget that. We may be seeking God, but God is also seeking us. But they do the right thing. They do the natural thing. A revelation is given to them. The world has changed, and they follow up on that. Let's check that out. Let's look for that. What's the evidence for that? They go explore, and they also find the Christ child. So these are two different paths. My personality, I'm more for the active seeker, you know. You can be passive, but just remember, there were probably hundreds of shepherds out around town that night, and the angels only came to this one group. So your odds are not great. But just remember that it can happen. Always be open to the possibility. But I need to keep busy. I'd be on those camels. And then we come to Jesus's baptism. He was a seeker. You know, this was not, he had to take a trip down here to seek baptism in the water by John the Baptist. And he was drawn to do this. In Mark, this is where the story starts. And I think if you talk to Jesus about all of the things he did in life, he was crucified. He did miracles. He said profound things to people. He was amazing. But what was the one event that was the most important? It would be the baptism. That's what changed his life. Everything proceeded from that. It gave him, he knew who he was. He knew what his purpose was. And he lived his life on purpose. Okay? That's a sign of an epiphany. And I think out of all of these, the one for me that most is the biggest epiphany. They couldn't write about this, but I'm thinking of the birth itself. That Christ, that child, who also begins in darkness. Got basic needs met. Why? This seems like a nice place. Let's stay here. But it wasn't meant to be. He's not meant to stay in darkness. And at that moment of birth, he experiences a completely different world. It's beautiful, it's dazzling, it changes everything. That's the epiphany that we want to have. And it is possible. So that third question about what happened. Okay? You heard stop. And then nothing. And at some point, you had reactions. What's happening? What are other people doing? Do I like this? I didn't expect it. Blah, blah, blah. The monkey mind starts talking away. There's a gap between the stop and the reactions. What happened? What is that like? What is that gap? Something to pay attention to, because that's where the grace of God enters. When you are completely empty, you're not going to stay empty. The grace of God has a place to enter. And just know that that is possible. You can choose to be open to that or not. I have to tell you, it might happen whether or not you're open to it. You may not believe in it. It may not make any sense, and it'll still happen. It does happen. Or you can have a practice of taking a moment, taking a time, taking a period of quiet, peace, silence, get the to-do list out of the way. Most of the practices in the world involve that. There's a certain discipline, a certain discipleship that's involved in doing that. That's not the experience, it's just the preparation. But it's something that could help. Okay. Amen.